So I said that's a pretty good deal, but can we get one for less? Let's look at preventing or curing HIV/AIDS as a case study, or I should say preventing or treating, really. Now, of course, AIDS is a major cause of death and disability in developing countries. And there are heaps of approaches to this. And so let's take them one at a time and have a look at the types of examples you can get. So what I've got on here is a graph of what equality costs. So here are a couple of different ways of treating AIDS. So the first one is treatment of Kaposi's sarcoma, the first of these blue bars. And Kaposi's sarcoma is an AIDS-defining illness. It's the type of illness that you don't get unless your immune system is so compromised that it shows that HIV is already very progressed in the patient. Now, you can directly treat that, and if people do treat it, the cost effectiveness is represented by this bar, where longer bars are better. So, in fact, you can see it's measured in how many quality-adjusted life years do you get per £1,000. And it turns out that if we put on here the £20,000 per quality barrier, you can see that it's around about the level that the NHS would fund. So it would be funded here. But it's, so I think it would be a pretty good deal in general to treat it. And if I had this illness, I would be paying to treat it and so on. Now, antiretroviral therapy, though, is the next one. And you can see that's much more cost-effective as a way of treating AIDS. It's about 20 times as cost-effective. So that's a really big difference, because you can help 20 times as many people. And so it shows that the price for a QALY is a 20th, of what we thought it was, because you could use it to treat people with antiretroviral therapy when they've got AIDS. Now, we can zoom out a bit, though, and look at some other methods to treat people. So prevention of transmission during pregnancy turns out to be about 3 or 4 times as cost-effective as that. And so we're moving here from the first one is something like treating the symptom. The second one is treating the illness. This third one is prevention of the illness. And it looks like it's quite a lot more cost-effective from the studies that have been done on this. Then we can zoom out again, and we can look at distribution of condoms. So it's another form of prevention of AIDS. And this looks much more cost-effective again. And now we can't even see the treatment of Kaposi's sarcoma on the graph anymore. And we can't even see the NHS threshold, although it is that little line there, so I have drawn it on. And then we can zoom out again and look at education for high-risk groups, which is a very high-level strategy, but is much cheaper, again, at preventing AIDS. So I think that's pretty amazing when you look at these things. And from an untrained perspective, you'd think, well, maybe they're all equally cost-effective or somewhere in the same factor of 10 or something like that. You wouldn't be expecting there to be this much distribution between the different interventions. At least I wouldn't be expecting it. I was quite surprised when I found out about this type of thing, and that's partly what led to my work. But let's continue this story a little bit further. Education for high-risk groups is the most cost-effective thing I know of for treating AIDS, well, preventing it. But we can zoom out a lot on that graph and look at treatment for parasitic infections is another health intervention that you could do. And this is about the limit of cost-effectiveness that anyone knows of for treatments that you can do at the moment. So I'll say a little bit more about this. So what are the parasitic infections I'm talking about here, and how can they be treated so much more effectively than for AIDS? So about 33 million people have AIDS, and about 1,400 million people, so 1.4 billion people, have what are called neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs. And most of these are infections caused by parasitic worms inside the body. And these worms range from microscopic, with very many of them obviously, through to very large macroscopic worms that could be up to 1 meter long or something like that, and that live in the gut. Or the microscopic ones sometimes live in the liver or the kidneys and other organs. So they're very unpleasant infections, although typically not as bad as having AIDS for each individual. Yes, symptoms include pain, blindness, and disfigurement. Serious disfigurement, actually, which is one of the worst symptoms because it means that people sometimes get rejected from their societies, and then that causes them a lot of trouble. And damage to kidneys, liver, and intestines, also death in some cases, or shortening of lifespan. And these things are very cheaply treatable. So they're not as bad for the individual as having AIDS in general, but they're much more cheaply treatable, so you can get more health for less money. And in fact, I should explain what I mean by cheaply treatable. It costs about, including all of the cost of distribution and overheads of the intervention, it costs around about 25 pence per cure. And you can go to areas where everyone has this illness, so you can treat everyone and it will cure everyone. Sometimes you hear figures, and the figure is how much it costs for the drug inside the injection, which doesn't take into account the costs of getting it to the village, which is a large issue of distributional costs, and it doesn't take into account the fact that not everyone who you inject was going to get say with a vaccine, was going to get the illness in the first place. And so once you take those things into account, the cost effectiveness decreases. So it's quite difficult and quite unintuitive. You basically have to look up the World Health Organization's reports on the cost effectiveness to find out what they are. It's not very intuitive. But in this case, it's very cheaply treatable, and they can get the treatments done through the school system because you mainly need to treat children. If you treat them for 7 years while they're at school, then they're basically immune for the rest of their lives to these things. So it turns out that that's actually a very effective way, and the treatments then can be owned by the state that you're working in. They can just make it part of the school system to do it, and they're often using donated drugs. So it turns out that all of these factors make it very cheaply treatable. So now here's an interesting thing. This particular one here comes down to £2.14 per quality adjusted life year, now that we've moved through this hierarchy of costs. And this is what before we'd said would pay for an hour of health. And you can actually get a year of health for the same price. I say £2.14 per quali. It's more like looking at £2.14 to get 10 years of life improved by 10% or something like that. It's not so much life extension as it is life quality improvement. But this is very impressive. I mean, this is what we pay for an hour, whereas what it does is helps people for years. So let's think about that, just that comparison between the hour and the year to try to let that sink in. So I prepared this little diagram. So this is an hour and a year. Okay, and I had to redo this slide because I originally had a whole lot of copies of this clock, and then it took about 2 minutes to load up the slide. So I had to just then take a screenshot of the slide and then show you the screenshot. So what can we learn from all of this? Let's have a little bit of a recap. I've taken you on a bit of a journey here. So health programs in developing countries can be amazingly cost effective, 10,000 times more so than here in the UK. I should say on the margin for the economists in the audience that there are treatments which are just as effective in the UK. In fact, the same drugs. However, they always give them out. It's not like they don't give them out due to lack of funding. So when they fund additional things here, they're about 10,000 times more, or 10,000 times less cost effective at that point. And I'm not complaining about them either. I think that they're actually still a good deal at that level. This is just showing how amazingly additional you can get. So this is also about 10,000 times better than is needed to be a good deal. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, if you go down the high street and you find something and it's a good deal, and then you find something 10,000 times better in the next shop, you'd be pretty impressed by that. At least I would. So money is worth much more than we might have thought in this regard. You might have thought that £2.14, you can't get that much for it, but now you find out you can get something 10,000 times better than maybe you thought before, which is pretty good. So it's a year of life at full health. But only if it's used for the best programs. And there were many programs there, and if you spend it on things which are less cost effective, it wouldn't quite reach that level. So that's something to bear in mind for later. Now, I want to connect this into charity. So these differences in cost effectiveness aren't just of interest to policymakers and people thinking about, people at the World Health Organization or in the NHS. They're also important for all of us when it comes to charity. So when we donate money to charity, we, or at least I think a lot of people, are trying to help people and to help them as much as they can. So suppose we donate money to help fight HIV/AIDS. It really matters whether the program is aimed at fighting Kaposi sarcoma or at education of high-risk groups, because one of those things is about 1,000 times more cost-effective than the other in terms of actually helping improve health. So you want to think about these things. It turns out it's actually very difficult to find out where the money's going with charities, which is unfortunate. I'll get onto that a little bit. Also, if we really want to help people, we should consider changing the focus in that case from AIDS to neglected tropical diseases if you can actually help people 10 times as much. Now, here is a series of diagrams that I prepared to give an example of this. So imagine you're putting a pound into a bucket to go towards a certain charity, and there's 5 different charities, each holding their own bucket. You can get a situation where I've represented as a square here to show how much good comes of donating to these groups, where the second one is 10 times the impact of the first one, and then 10 times that, and then 10 times that, and then this one requires a couple of full slides of blue in order to demonstrate it. And so this is really important. And also, when you're thinking about giving to charities, that it really matters how much goes into that 5th bucket. Because for every pound coin that goes in there, it does a huge amount of good, whereas it outweighs, say, 5,000 pound coins going into the first bucket. So it becomes really important where to give, and it ends up being, I think, well, we'll see here. Where to give ends up being, I think, even more important than if you give. You might think, well, that doesn't really make sense, because if you don't give anything, then, but you see the rhetorical point I'm trying to make here, is that if someone was previously giving enough money, let's say, to cure 100 years of life, or to prevent 100 years of ill health, or to extend life by 100 years, and the difference between them doing that or nothing, 0 years, is smaller than the difference between the 100 years and extending that to 10,000 years. That's the basic idea. But yes, we tend to distribute our money across these healthcare interventions, something like this. You might have hoped that we would really push it up towards the 5th bucket in most cases, but it doesn't happen so much. And one of the reasons for this is that there's something of a disconnect when it comes to charity, where if we go down to the high street and we do want to buy something, suppose you want to buy a shirt, then if one shop had shirts 10,000 times the price of another shop, you just wouldn't buy them there, right? So it would be pretty simple. But the problem is there's a disconnect when it comes to charity. In some sense, it's a little bit like a market transaction, because someone provides money and then the charity helps some other people. And in these cases, though, what the disconnect is that the person who receives the benefit is different from the person who pays the price. And so there's less of a feedback loop keeping the prices in a sensible level when it comes to charity. And remember that I am saying that actually even this first bucket is actually a good deal. If none of the other buckets existed, I think it would be well worth doing. And I just think this just shows how amazingly cost-effective these later ones are. So what does this all mean? Well, our money is worth an incredible amount. But this is only if it's not used on ourselves. So this is where it comes into the sharing treasures aspect. And only if it's spent very wisely. So you can get something like 10,000 times the benefit for others as we can for ourselves, because we thought that the £2.30 for a year of healthy life, sorry, £2.30 for an hour of life was a good deal, and then we find out that you can get 10,000 hours of life for the same price if it's for someone else. So it does actually seem to be that, other people can get as much good from an extra pound as I could from an extra 10,000 pounds, which is a pretty scary concept, I think. It's exciting as well. It's interesting. And so if you want to put this into percentage terms, I mean, this is a 1,000,000% improvement, which is pretty good. And another way to think about it is it can turn hours into years. So continuing this, we can do amazing things if we want to, once you realize that you can have such an impact on other people's health. So while living in the UK, doing whatever you want to do and living an affluent lifestyle, if you were to give away 10% of your future income, which is compatible with all of those things, then you could save about 50,000 years of life at full health. So if you think back, to the birth of Christ, there's 2,000 years. This is 25 times longer than that. This is pretty good. Equivalent to 500 centuries of life at full health is just another way of conceptualizing that, or realistically, more like 500 millennia of life improved by 10% quality, probably. Spread over about 50,000 people, probably. So 50,000, that's the kind of amount of people that you could help. So it's pretty exciting, I think, to think, hey, I could do that if I wanted to. Maybe that's an interesting possibility.